Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk with CastleHill. Today's topic is around regulatory change management and the announcement of a new partnership. We are now a partner with LogicGate, an awesome tool that we've been talking with the team for a long time, and really having getting ready for that activity overall. Specifically, we're going to talk more about the reg change management side of it. So we'll talk a little bit about LogicGate and its capabilities, but more specifically around reg change management and how reg change management is really driving those capabilities for companies. It's a very key component, and input into any company's risk management capability. Requires a very strong business process and the appropriate content to go along with it. But using those processes and content, you need that powerful tool behind it. And LogicGate is a very powerful tool, right? Very strong ease of use and powerful workflow features that allow us to rapidly implement the best practice risk management process quickly and efficiently. So with that, I'll introduce Marc Van de Ven, who's a senior solution engineer at LogicGate. Marc, maybe you can just introduce yourself, a little bit of background about yourself, and then if you wouldn't mind, a little bit of an overview of LogicGate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. So a little bit about myself. My name is Marc Van de Ven. I'm a senior solution engineer here at LogicGate. I have 8 years of experience in the governance, risk, and compliance technology market, where I started my career as a business analyst for a software firm based out of the Netherlands. During my tenure there, that company got acquired by the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, which allowed me to move to the United States and join their governance solutions department. And it was really during this time that I started to really get a better understanding of regulatory compliance and also really piqued my interest, like what is this all about? What are the challenges in the industries, and how can software solutions specifically solve for those challenges? And maybe not specific just to regulatory compliance, but also regulatory inventory management and regulatory compliance and exam management, and also some of the downstream effect use cases, as I call them, including policies and procedure management, as an example. When it comes down to LogicGate, so a little intro on us. So here at LogicGate, we believe that easy to use technology can change the trajectory of organizations and the lives of their employees. And we do that on a daily basis with our customers by providing the most configurable and efficient and easy to use GRC platform on the market, which is called the Risk Cloud. And the Risk Cloud is a SaaS-based platform that allows you to streamline and operationalize your regulatory risk and compliance programs by utilizing our 20 plus and counting out-of-the-box application templates.
And one of the things I love about LogicGate, Marc, is just the fact that as you're building solutions inside of LogicGate, you're defining the workflow, right? You're visualizing the workflow specifically, and that's really important, I think, to help people with their requirements and being able to visualize it immediately. There's no translation required.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And in a pre-COVID world, right, we would sit in an office, and you would grab a whiteboard, and we would start drawing out like, hey, this is where the process starts, and we're going to go to this step, we're going to go to the next. We actually have that digitalized in the back end of our platform. So we really have a visual whiteboard in our back end, to your point, while we talk with customers to really start drawing out like, hey, is this what your process looks like? And if not, we can make very simple and quick changes through our no-code platform. Absolutely.
And just to put a little more of a plug in, LogicGate, you folks have been expanding tremendously, not only from a staff and capabilities perspective, but customers and a lot of successes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we this week actually we got another announcement that we had some venture capital investment within our company. So there's a lot of growth. There's a lot of hype going on about LogicGate. We're onboarding a whole lot of new roles. There's a lot of growth, and hopefully we will be able to also expand internationally next year.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks for that overview. I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited about the opportunity and the partnership. I know that we've been following the progress that the team has been making, and it's really tremendous. Very, very excited about it, as I said. So just talk a little bit about the regulatory change management process. So I'll maybe just provide a framework and an overview for it, and then we can just keep diving into it and talk about how the tools there. So when I think about regulatory change management, I typically think about it in three major steps, and you alluded to this already. right? We have the content acquisition side of it, right? Where we have different providers, we have different government agencies, we have different regulatory agencies who are providing content out to the constituent groups or to the industries. And those folks then take that information. We have to get it into the first part of the workflow and the business process part of that workflow, right? So that piece of saying, does this set of content actually impact us, right? Is it the right information? Do we sell that product? Do we sell it in that place? Do we perform this task on behalf of our customers or as a service for our customers? And so that initial, what I sometimes, that initial gating activity of pushing that stuff forward. And then the last piece, and you alluded to, is really then how do we react to that? And if it is something which is going to cause us to need to change something in our world, or at least to verify that we don't need to change something in our world, how does that then flow through the rest of your business so that you can tie that bow around it to say, here's the change that came through, and here's how we reacted to it across the board. So when I think about it in that way, is what am I missing?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, Tim. I don't think you're necessarily missing anything there. I mean, these are the conversations that I have with our prospects on a daily basis. The way I look at it is really twofold. To your point, there's typically a content challenge, and there's a process challenge, right? So I distinctly make a clear distinction there, because a lot of folks that I talk with, depending on their maturity within their regulatory compliance program, they might have challenges knowing, like, hey, what do I have to really abide by? Like, what are the obligations that really pertain to me and my organization based off of the products and services that I provide? So that's typically a challenge, to your point, with the content providers, right? Like, they're very good in providing guidance of like, hey, here's the feed, and here's the pre-triaging to only give the information that pertains to the organization. But that's only one piece of the puzzle, in my opinion, because once you have that content in place, then, in my opinion, you need a strong workflow to put a repeatable process around, like you already mentioned, documenting from an audit trail perspective for both internal audit and external audit purposes. What do we do? Is it applicable to our organization? Yes or no? And if no, then we can simply dismiss it. If yes, then of course there's more things that need to be figured out. What's the impact, maybe from a financial perspective, legal perspective, operational perspective? So in addition to that, I briefly talked about it in my intro, there's always downstream effects as well, right? It's not just simply like, okay, there was a change to a reg, we looked at it, and we have a nice process in place. There's always things that happen, right? There's maybe policies and procedures that are impacted by this change that have to be reviewed and that have to be updated, as an example. Maybe there are specific business processes within the organization that have to be looked at as well to make sure that the process itself is compliant with those new changes and rules. And that's really why I make that clear distinction between, the content challenges that I typically hear from prospects that I talk with, but also more that repeatable process to make sure that, once you have the content in place, that nothing slips through the cracks, because every single change will go through that repeatable workflow process that's defined in an application like LogicGate.
Yeah, you talk about the auditability in effect, right? The internal and external auditability of that. But why don't we start there? I mean, how does Risk Cloud help from that side of it? Right. We'll go backwards. We'll take a different approach, right? Thinking
Sure.
about
Yeah.
the
No.
auditability
Go ahead.
back. Nope.
Yeah, no, I think it's twofold, right? Like, number one, having that repeatable process to show to regulators that you have a formal process in place to manage these changes. So there is actually a program in place. I think that's tremendous. That already provides tremendous value to customers and prospects that I talk with. Number two, however, is you can have the best content, you can have the best workflows, but if you are unable to prove compliance, then all the efforts that you put into the process are basically wasted. So you need robust reporting capabilities to actually pull out the information that you work on from an operational perspective within each of those workflows. So whether it's, like you mentioned, the decision-making points during the workflow, like, was this applicable, yes or no? And what's the rationale that the SME documented on why they believe it's applicable to their organization? But then secondly, also being able to prove to the regulators, like, yes, we did our impact assessments. These are the corrective action plans that we've put in place to make changes to our organization, whether that's, some might be completed, some might be in progress, but at least at any point in time, you can prove statuses to the regulators. And I think that's the key or the core point here, because in the end, like I mentioned, it's the reports, and you have to prove compliance. If you're unable to do that, then you're going to spend a lot of time following up on findings from the regulators.
Yeah. Yep. And that, and I think another key part of it is making sure that you get to the right people inside of the company. Right. It's not just not just having that workflow, but also being able to prove that you've talked to the right folks in the company. I think that's a step that a lot of people forget because of the second line and a half concept that often creeps into firms where somebody's a subject matter expert and they're the ones making those decisions. One of the things I love about the Risk Cloud is that we are able to very easily surface that to the right people. Is that something which comes up a lot with different prospects?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes more towards as well, like what are who are the folks that I typically talk with, right? Because every
Mhm.
organization is a little bit different. So the ones that I typically talk to most are legal and compliance departments, right? And they're
Yep.
subject matter experts within each of those departments. But there's always collaboration happening, right? Not just between legal and compliance and potentially even external counsel, but also broader risk, right? Like regulatory risk is not a siloed risk, right? So depending on the level of maturity of the prospects that I talk with, I mean, some come to me and asking questions specifically about the pains that they have within their respective teams, right? Like legal, compliance, and the content and the workflow challenges that we just briefly talked about. But
Yep.
then for moving on, there's also a broader discussion of regulatory risk as it rolls up into enterprise risk management. And that's, again, to your point, I think where the collaboration comes into play, being able to break down the silos in an application to make sure that folks from different functions across the lines of defense can reuse information, without duplicating it, and really leverage operational work that each team is putting into that platform.
Yeah, I think that's a really key aspect of it is that visibility is just so important to the process and having that throughout the capability. What kind of industries are you seeing come to the fore at the moment? We've seen a tremendous explosion of the different industry areas, whether driven from the data privacy regulations or even just being able to react to changes in business behavior because of COVID and the pandemic. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same. I mean, privacy, in my opinion, that's a whole beast. That's a whole nother beast, right? Like CCPA, GDPR, privacy compliance. What I specifically also see more, from an industry perspective, going back to your question, typically the ones that are obviously more heavily regulated are the ones that I talk with, right? So banks, financial institutions, credit unions, insurance companies, but also healthcare companies. And I think right now we're in an interesting environment, especially here in the US. Also with some of the distribution of the CARES Act, where I do get a lot of inquiries about, how are we going to manage that? Because there's a lot of things that are going on from a compliance perspective, and a lot of these providers also on the healthcare side need to be aware of what needs to be updated and what's the latest and greatest from a regulatory perspective. So I agree. I mean, very high level. There's obviously different use cases there, like I mentioned with privacy and more the quote unquote traditional regulatory compliance as you would see it in a financial institution. Yeah, I basically have both of those conversations. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've seen some. Yeah, to your point about the CARES Act, you get into a lot of different industries that you wouldn't have necessarily expected. We're getting into a lot of the supply chain side of it. That's been an interesting change in what we've seen overall. The fourth party risk that starts to come from the supply chain side of it, and how are they managing some of these items?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, and plus, I guess also the downstream effects of COVID itself, right? Like even everyone's
mm,
working from home. Like the one I actually had, I talked to a customer last week who specifically mentioned that they have a strategic objective within their organization to digitize, and this is really what they use, digitize processes. So that's something, not necessarily just unique to regulatory change management. I think this is something that we will see in the foreseeable future, in the next couple of years, grow even faster, across an organization, but more specifically for GRC, whether it's, compliance or regulatory risk or enterprise risk, or to your point, third party and fourth party risk. people are looking to digitize those processes because it's no longer acceptable in this day and age to do it manually in spreadsheets and prove compliance that way to internal and external regulators.
Yeah, proof is a big part of it. How are you going to make sure that you're actually coming forward with the right level of information and going from there? How do you see customers back to the content side of it? So I know we have partnerships. LogicGate has partnerships with content providers. Have you seen more customers? Because it's a frequent question we get. Have you seen more customers who are looking to integrate things that they already have in house or processes they have in house, or are they looking more for the content providers, or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. Like I mentioned, I actually had a discussion yesterday with a credit union specifically about the regulatory change use case, and their challenge right now is that it's all very manual, right? They scour the web, they look at changes from the NCUA, in this case, the regulatory body for credit unions, to track changes, track newsletters, and all that information is currently done manually, right? So someone actually scours those websites, subscribes to those news feeds, and a very manual process. So they were actually not only looking again for a more robust way to have a repeatable process, right, with the workflows that we talked about, but they're also very keen on knowing the offering and the partnerships that we, for example, have with CastleHill from a content perspective, because like I said, it's really those two pieces to the puzzle. Like if you just have content but you don't have a repeatable process, then you'll most likely still struggle and lay in your bed worrying like, hey, did something slip through the cracks? And you can have a great workflow, but if you don't have the right content, then you still don't know if you have the big picture, right? So that's the reason why I do think both components are crucial to a regulatory compliance program.
Yeah, no, it's no question. I think that the greater maturity for some companies end up realizing that they have to do both of those things, right? They can't just rely necessarily on the content providers, because the content providers are providing very strong services, very very good capabilities, but there's always going to be some aspect that's unique to their business specifically that they need to keep a handle on. Even if it's just the local regulation required or something along those lines, because there's too many places.
Yeah, and I do sometimes see some hesitation there as well, right? Because you're basically you're handing the keys to the car, so to say, to automation and technology, and that's
Right.
sometimes that's scary, right? Like, can I trust the feed, right? Is everything included in the feed, or am I missing something? Like, how do I know? And again, also because you need to prove compliance, how do I know I covered everything? How is it like? Is there a change that we didn't cover? Is there a new regulation that I missed? So. Those are discussions that I have as well, where some folks still say like, hey, let's start off with making sure that we first have a repeatable process, right? Process before technology. And then once that process is in place, I can then augment that process. Exactly. Then I can augment that process with technology, whether it's the content or the workflow. So, I think it's interesting, right, that you see those different levels of maturity within each of these industries, but it makes the conversation so much more fun, right? Because at least for me, for the folks that I talk with, I can bring things to the table of like, hey, this is what I see with other companies. This what are we seeing in the market? So definitely fun and exciting times in regulatory change.
Yep. And I think that's a good segue to how we're hoping to work together as a partnership, because we also have that whole business experience and plus the content awareness with some of the providers that we work with, and being able to bring those things together to the customer to really have that full featured solution in hand when we're walking in the door, and not have to start from the greenfield side of it overall. So that's, I think, going to be a big part of how we're hoping to work together, not only to leverage the fantastic tool, but CastleHill's ability to bring the process side of it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I think that was that missing puzzle piece, right? Like I think we on the risk cloud side of things, as you know, we provide so many robust ways to operationalize processes, but then you always got to those conversations during a demo or during a call with prospects, like, hey, what about content? And now that we have this partnership with CastleHill, we can at any point in time bring you guys in and bring that expertise, because in my opinion, that's a whole different ball game, right? Like processes is one, but being an expert on the content and knowing how those feeds work, knowing how granular some of the content goes, right? Some might cut off at the regulation level, some might go more granular all the way down to paragraph, rule text, or obligation level.
Yep.
That's so valuable to bring those conversations to a presentation as well. So that's why I'm personally super excited about this partnership with CastleHill.
I appreciate it. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So
Absolutely.
And I'm ready to get back to Ireland as well, and so we'll work on that international piece too. So
There you go.
we'll be good. So just to wrap up a little bit. So I always ask this question. So what do you see in the future? What do you see? Where is this in 2 years? If we can go that far out, ignoring COVID and some of the other things. What do you see out on the horizon?
I think what I see on the horizon is more holistic compliance, right? Like getting out of the narrow view of what only pertains to you and your piece of the puzzle, right? So when I talk about, I briefly talked about this in my introduction as well. I try to weave this in during my presentations when I talk, for example, about regulatory change. By asking questions to prospects like, hey, what about your policies and procedures, right? Are those impacted? Do you have controls linked to those policies and procedures? Or how do you currently actually prove compliance when it comes down to regulatory exams that the regulatory authorities do when you receive the first day letters? Like how do you manage those programs? So I think where this is going, I think it's twofold. Number one, we will see continuation in digitization of these processes. That's number one. That's unstoppable with this day and age of technology that's available to operationalize those programs. But then also, like I mentioned, I see more holistic connectivity between compliance teams, risk teams, enterprise-wide as well. So.
I totally agree. The horizon scanning aspect of it from the content perspective is where a lot of this is going, and being able to then use that across the entire ecosystem of your risk management world is it's just going to continue to happen, and people need to be ready for it. So
absolutely.
I know we're just up on time. So again, thank you, Marc, for joining us. Very excited about the new partnership with LogicGate, and looking forward to working with you and the team further as we get into this.
Absolutely, likewise. And again, Tim, I appreciate you for bringing me on. And like I mentioned, I'm also super pumped to start this partnership with CastleHill.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.